This is White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness, not in invisible systems, conferring dominance on my group. Through work to bring materials from women's studies into the rest of the curriculum, I've often noticed men's unwillingness to grant that they are overprivileged, even though they may grant that women are disadvantaged. They may say they will work to improve women's status in the society, the university, or the curriculum, but they can't or won't support the idea of lessening men's. Why would I do that? Denials that amount to taboos surround the subject of advantages that men gain from women's disadvantages. These denials protect male privilege from being fully acknowledged, lessened, or ended. Is white privilege a male privilege? I'm a little confused on that. Thinking through unacknowledged male privilege as a phenomenon, I realized that since hierarchies in our society are interlocking, that was most likely a phenomenon of white privilege that was similarly denied and protected. As a white person, I realized that I had been taught about racism as something that puts others at a disadvantage, but had been taught not to see one of its corollary aspects, white privilege, which puts me at an advantage. I think whites are carefully taught not to recognize white privilege, as males are taught not to recognize male privilege. So I have begun in an untutored way to ask what it is like to have white privilege. Yeah, what is it? What is it like to have white privilege? Fancy car, nice job, opportunity, what is it? I have come to see white privileges as an invisible package of unearned assets that I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. Describing white privilege makes one newly accountable, as we in women's studies work to reveal male privilege and ask men to give up some of their power. So one who writes about having the white privilege must ask, having described it, what will I do to lessen or end it? I'm not sure. Why would I want to lessen an advantaged person? I can understand why you would want to give the same advantages to the less advantaged, but not the other way around. After I realized the extent to which men work from a base of unacknowledged privilege, I understood that much of their oppressiveness was unconscious. Maybe it is. Then I remembered the frequent charges from women of color that white women whom they encounter are oppressive. I began to understand why we are justly seen as oppressive, even when we don't see ourselves that way. I began to count the ways in which I enjoy unearned skin privilege and have been conditioned into oblivion about its existence. I'm not sure this lady even really knows what she's talking about. My schooling gave me no training in seeing myself as an oppressor, as an unfairly advantaged person, or as a participant in a damaged culture. I was taught to see myself as an individual whose moral state depended on her individual moral will. My schooling followed the pattern my colleague Elizabeth Minnick has pointed out. Whites are taught to think of their lives as morally neutral, normative, and average, and also ideal, so that when we work to benefit others, this is seen as work that will allow them to be more like us. See, I don't agree with that. I believe I grew up in a country that's not really cool with that. I believe that we're in a very diverse community and day and age now, where that I don't feel like my way of life or automatic white privilege has actually made my life the norm at all. You know, I see so many different walks of life, so I just don't agree with that. The daily effects of white privilege. I decided to try to work on myself, at least by identifying some of the daily effects of white privilege in my life. I have chosen those conditions that I think in my case attach somewhat more to skin color privilege than to class, religion, ethnic status, or geographic location. Though, of course, all these other factors are intricately intertwined. As far as I can tell, my African-American co-workers, friends, and acquaintances with whom I come into daily or frequent contact in this particular time, place, and line of work cannot count on most of these conditions. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area that I can afford and in which I would want to live. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can turn on... These are rights that you think you automatically have. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. And so you think that other people can't do that also? That's just not true. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in the area that I can afford and in which I would want to live. Okay. I can, anybody, there's equal opportunity. And the world is a much better place now than it was 50 years ago for all of us. So I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. Yeah, maybe you can, maybe you can't. You never know. People are all different. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. Nobody has any guarantee. I can turn on the television or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. When I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. Well, that's just true. So I can be sure that's not really a privilege. That's just history. History is history. So if I want to, I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. That's a privilege, or, I don't necessarily, if everybody kept literature and gave it to their kids and their kids gave it to each other's kids, why would it have to go away? If I want to, I can be pretty sure of finding a publisher for this piece on white privileges. Possibly so. I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represented into a supermarket and find the staple foods that fit in with my cultural traditions. Into a hairdresser shop and find someone who can deal with my hair. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial reliability. These aren't privileges. These aren't privileges because you're white. These are privileges because you've made good choices. And so, I don't believe that, people that make bad choices don't get the same opportunities. And that's really all it boils down to. Any person of any nationality, ethnicity, or color, or race who can get online and order something that has money can buy things just like you can. And can find a place to get their hair done just the way they want. They can find the products that match their culture or their interests. So I don't feel like there's any more of a privilege when I want to get online and look for something to buy. I don't feel any kind of discrimination. Everything's available to everybody. I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them. I think anybody can arrange for that. I can swear or dress in secondhand clothes or not answer letters without having people attribute these choices to the bad morals, the poverty, or the illiteracy of my race. Hey, people, those are poor choices. It doesn't matter what color you are. I can speak in public to a powerful male group without putting my race on trial. I can speak in public to a powerful male group without putting my race on trial. Maybe so, but not your sex or your gender. So, in today's political arena, everything's fair game for debate and interpretation. I can do well in a challenging situation, but anybody can speak to a powerful male group without putting their race on trial. Just because people don't look at things right doesn't make it right. So it doesn't make it a good choice. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. I think anybody can do that. Anybody can do well in a challenging situation, and just be glad that they overcame that obstacle and that challenge. Any race or ethnicity can do that. I am never asked to speak for all the people of my racial group. I don't think that's a white privilege. I think anybody who wants to speak on themselves is a reflection of themselves. I can remain oblivious of the language and customs of persons of color who contribute the world's majority without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion. I don't really think that's true. Anybody that has any opinion, people are going to judge you for it. So whether it's inside your own culture and community and likeness of race or ethnicity or background, that's just how people are. I can criticize our government and talk about how much I fear its policies and behavior without being seen as a cultural outsider. Again, I don't really agree with that. 18. I can be pretty sure that if I ask to talk to the person in charge, I will be facing a person of my race. That is not a privilege that you have in today's society. There's such diversity, there's no way you have any guarantee when you ask for somebody in charge that you're going to get a white person. There's just no way. There's just no way. I absolutely don't agree with that. If a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. The cops think everybody are suspects now. Everyone. So I can easily buy posters, postcards, picture books, greeting cards, dolls, toys, and children's magazines featuring people of my race. Now, so can everybody else. I can go home from most meetings of organizations I belong to feeling somewhat tied in rather than isolated, out of place, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, or feared. Yeah. I think those are just interpersonal social skills, so good job for you. I can take a job with an affirmative action employer without having coworkers on the job suspect that I got it because of race. With reverse discrimination now, I don't think that's true. So if you have mostly one ethnicity there and you got the job, and you are in fact white, then that's not a privilege, that's affirmative action, which means that people will probably think that you got it just because you were white. So it really depends. I can choose public accommodation without fearing that people of my race cannot get in or will be mistreated in the places I have chosen. The civil rights laws, that people don't do that anymore. I can be sure that if I need legal or medical help, my race will not work against me. Again, I don't see those discriminations anymore, and especially with affirmative action, and I don't believe that's any more of a white privilege than anyone else. If my day, week, or year is going badly, I need not ask of each negative episode or situation whether it has racial overtones. Well, you shouldn't be doing that anyways, and I don't think that other people need to be doing that either. So I can choose blemish, cover, or bandages in flesh color that more or less match my skin. Elusive and fugitive. I think they have colors for everybody's makeup nowadays. I repeatedly forgot each of the realizations on this list until I wrote it down. For me, white privilege has turned out to be an elusive and fugitive subject. The pressure to avoid it is great. For in facing it, I must give up the myth of meritocracy. If these things are true, this is not such a free country. One's life is not what one makes it. Many doors open for certain people through no virtues of their own. And some people make excuses for everything. When there's the world of opportunity at all of our fingertips. So, you can quit making excuses for shit and start getting shit done and make better decisions and move, take that mobility upwards or do nothing. Let's see. If these things are true, this is not such a free country. One's life is not what one makes it. Many doors open for certain people through no virtues of their own. That's just not true. There's opportunity everywhere. In unpacking this invisible knapsack of white privilege, I have listed conditions of daily experience that I once took for granted, nor did I think of any of these prerequisites as bad for the holder. I now think that we need a more finely differentiated taxonomy of privilege, for some of these varieties are only what one would want for everyone in a just society, and others give license to be ignorant, oblivious, arrogant, and destructive. Yeah, but it's a free market, so welcome to capitalism. I see a pattern running through the matrix of white privilege, a pattern of assumptions that were passed on to me as a white person. There was one main piece of cultural turf. It was my own turf, and I was among those who could control the turf. My skin color was an asset for any more I was educated to want to make. I could think of myself as belonging in major ways and of making social systems work for me. I could freely disparage, fear, neglect, or be oblivious to anything outside of the dominant cultural forms. Being of the main culture, I could also criticize it fairly freely. In proportion as my racial group was being made confident, comfortable, and oblivious, other groups were likely being made unconfident, uncomfortable, and alienated. Whiteness protected me from any kinds of hostility, distress, and violence, which I was being subtly trained to visit in turn upon people of color. For this reason, the word privilege now seems to me misleading. We usually think of the privilege as being a favored state, whether earned or conferred by birth or luck. Yet some of the conditions I have described here work systemically to overpower certain groups. Such privilege simply confers dominance because of one's race over sex. See, I don't think you made that point. Earned strength, unearned power. I want, then, to distinguish between earned strength and unearned power conferred systemically. Power from unearned privilege can look like strength when it is in fact permission to escape or to dominate. But not all the privileges on my list are inevitably damaging. Some, like the expectation that neighbors will be decent to you or that your race will not count against you in court, should be the norm in a just society. Others, like the privilege to ignore less powerful people, distort the humanity of the holders as well as the ignored groups. I don't think that we live in that kind of world today, so I think we're very liberated in moving forward. We might at least start by distinguishing between positive advantages, which we can work to spread, the negatives, types of advantage, which, unless rejected, will always reinforce our present hierarchies. For example, the feeling that one belongs within the human circle, as Native Americans say, should not be seen as privilege for a few. Ideally, it is an unearned entitlement. At present, since only a few have it, it is an unearned advantage for them. This paper results from the process of coming to see that some of the power that I originally saw as attendant on being a human being in the United States consisted in unearned advantage and conferred dominance. I just don't feel like this lady's making any sense. I have met very few men who are truly distressed about systemic unearned male advantage and conferred dominance, and so one question for me and others like me is whether we will be like them, or whether we will get truly distressed, even outraged about unearned race advantage and conferred dominance, and if so, what we will do to lessen them. In any case, we need to do more work in identifying how they actually affect our daily lives. Many, perhaps most, of our white students in the United States think that racism doesn't affect them because they are not people of color. They do not see whiteness as a racial identity. In addition, since race and sex are not the only advantaging systems at work, we need similarly to examine the daily experience of having age advantage or ethnic advantage or physical disability or physical ability, or advantage related to nationality, religion, or sexual orientation. With all the affirmation that we have today, affirmative action, everybody is actually, in my opinion, now has privileges that the whites don't. So where are the special white privileges now? What affirmative action is there for white privilege? And if there isn't one, there's your reverse discrimination. So, it really don't make sense. And that's why I don't see it as an issue that really needs to be discussed. Difficulties and dangers surrounding the task of finding parallels are many. Since racism, sexism, and heterosexism are not the same, the advantages associated with them should not be seen as the same. In addition, it is hard to disentangle aspects of unearned advantage that rest more on social class, economic class, race, religion, sex, and ethnic identities than on other factors. Still, all of the oppressions are interlocking, as the members of the Combahee River Collective pointed out in their Black Feminist Statement of 1977. One factor seems clear about all of their interlocking oppressions. They take both active forms, which we can see, and embedded forms, which as a member of the dominant group, one is taught not to see. In my class and place, I did not see myself as a racist because I was taught to recognize racism only as individual acts of meanness by members of my group, which isn't always the case, and no, we're not taught that. We're taught racism is racism no matter who does it or whether it's done by a big group or a small group. Racism is racism. Never in invisible systems conferring unsought racial dominance on my group of birth. You're looking too far into it. Disapproving of the systems won't be enough to change them. I was taught to think that racism could end if white individuals changed their attitudes, but a white skin in the United States opens many doors for whites whether or not we approve of the way dominance has been conferred on us. Individual acts can palliate, but cannot end these problems. Okay, so, I've made poor choices in my life, and, where I'm at sucks. I took responsibility for it, and I don't agree with that white privilege. If I was so white privileged, my life would be, so established. I would have everything that everyone else doesn't have, or I would feel like, I had a right to it or easier access to it, and I don't. I don't feel that way. It seems to me that obliviousness about white advantage, like obliviousness about male advantage, is kept strongly enculturated in the United States so as to maintain the myth of meritocracy, the myth that democratic choice is equally available to all. I do agree with that. So, keeping most people unaware that freedom of confident action is there for just a small number of people props up those in power and serves to keep power in the hands of the same groups that have most of it already. Well, you know what? People that make good choices, get better results. Although systemic change takes many decades, there are pressing questions for me, and I imagine for some others like me, if we raise our daily consciousness on the prerequisites of being light-skinned, what will we do with such knowledge? As we know from watching men, it is an open question whether we will choose to use unearned advantage to weaken hidden systems of advantage, and whether we will use any of our arbitrarily awarded power to try to reconstruct power systems on a broader base. This lady has just got, a bone to pick with men. In my honest opinion, I really feel like, the topic was white privilege. So she turned it into this sex or gender thing, and I didn't really like that. Permission to reprint this excerpt must be obtained from her at the address above or by calling her. And I am not going to reprint it, but I did read it. It is by Peggy McIntosh. white privilege and male privilege. Okay. A personal account of coming to see correspondence through work in women's studies. 1988. So, you can see kind of how outdated that is, and in that time, you know, maybe she had some ground to stand on. But I just wanted to explain what that was and that reference on racism and white privilege, and I just don't see that that's relevant today. And I don't think, you know, after civil rights, after people got the liberation they were looking for, I really feel like it hasn't been as big of a problem. And so that's how I feel.